And I'm going to share the screen. It's going to be about miniature theatres, which I'll tell you why I got into it a bit further on. But it's also known as toy theatres. Originally, they were known as juvenile dramas. Very kind of formal, isn't it?
Sounds a bit like the elders sometimes.
Yeah, they started off in the 18th century and they were popular till around about 1880. Then they kind of died. But then there was a very interesting revival which continues to this day, which I'll come on to. And they're very much collectibles as well, both for adults and children. And what you do is, after buying and making the theatre, originally made out of wood and later of cardboard, you can buy printed sheets to create and stage performances of hundreds of popular productions, from Victorian melodramas to pantomimes and historical romances. I like this picture. I don't know who it is doing it. So they were sold by publishers and stationers, and very, very famously to Stevenson, who Robert Louis Stevenson, who came across them when he was young in an Edinburgh stationer's and bought them there. So it was a choice of either penny plain or twopence coloured printed sheets. And he couldn't understand why anybody would buy the coloured one, because most of the fun was done in the colouring in of the characters and so on, as you can imagine. So there you go. The actors were mounted on little tin slides and pushed onto the stage from the side wings, which I think my own particular interest in this wasn't really miniature theatres, though it was a miniature theatre. I think I mentioned it before. Me and my best friend Brian Beardwood, great name, it was near Christmas time, and he had a couple of marionettes and a miniature theatre. And so they were a bit out of size to the theatre, but we did a production of, I can't remember what it was, something Christmassy, just between the two of us, no audience. And meanwhile, we'd split up by hand a pile of newspaper to make snow, and then we sang "We're Dreaming of a Merry Christmas" as we poured it over the stage, which is which, looking back on it, it's rather sweet, I think. There you go. It also came up because of this exhibition called Cardboard Gothic, Damsels, Demons and Heroes. And this was put on at Strawberry Hill in Twickenham. Is anybody familiar with Strawberry Hill?
No.
I think at one time it was a Catholic FE college. I'm sure there was something going on at Strawberry Hill there, because I remember visiting a friend of mine there. But it was the first house to be built in the Gothic style by Horace Walpole, who was he was a Whig politician, a writer, art historian, antiquarian, and lived from 1717 to 1797. So the exhibition of miniature theatres, which were very often Gothic in style, was put on at Strawberry Hill last month, where they had 14 different ones, 14 miniature stages and everything available. It would have been really, there are lots of things going on in London that you can never get down to see. So in a way, this is my kind of way of going to them. There's the one of the scenes, which I think is lovely. Albert and the Imp, 1828. And you could see you could kind of cut it out and use it as a character. Very interesting. So they also gave you the play as well. So you actually had a script, which was very good for your reading skills, because it was quite complicated language in some of them as well. So this was that one. And the Gothic origin, well, the Goths, as I'm sure you remember, the Goths and Visigoths from history, were originally a German tribe. And it also became a term used for a certain type of medieval architecture with pointed vaults and arches, a bit like that. The Gothic style. And also then you eventually got its kind of reinvention in Gothic times. It's called Neo-Gothic, I suppose you'd call it. in which it was used in both in architecture and also linked to Gothic romance novels, of which the first one was written, it is generally accepted, The Castle of Otranto, by Horace Walpole in 1764. And that's an example of an illustration, a monastery graveyard, very, very Gothic looking, because what the Gothic brought to literature, to novels, it was darkness, suspense, mystery, sometimes terror. There are also beautiful heroines and ancient prophecies. I mean, we're all familiar with it. Gothic is still strong, isn't it? It's still in all the in modern films. People love vampires and such.
Yeah, vampires.
So the 19th century was the beginning of the famous monster characters like Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley. There's also Daphne du Maurier's later Rebecca, and then Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Those are also versions of that. And that is Walpole's architectural creation in Strawberry Hill. That's after it's been renovated, actually, in 2010, I think it was. So it was in Twickenham. And at the time, it overlooked the Thames, but which presumably means it doesn't now somehow. Probably stuff has been built in front of it. So he revived the Gothic style many decades before his Victorian successors. So it was transformed into what Walpole, willfully misquoting Pope, referred to as a Gothic Vatican. I think it looks fabulous. I really like it. It's like a wedding cake, isn't it? It's done up.
It's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, great minds think alike there, Jackie.
Naturally, Bernard.
This is the idea of a penny plain and tuppence coloured. This is obviously a coloured one. And it was very much during the Regency period that the melodrama, the Gothic melodrama, dominated the London stage. And these spectacles were reproduced as miniature cutout prints for use in the model theatres as a form of home entertainment by children. And this is what Robert Louis Stevenson said when he came to visit the famous Benjamin Pollocks Toy Theater shop, which is still going strong. And I'll come on to that. If you love art, folly, or the bright eyes of children, speed to Pollocks. It's a bit like an advertising ploy, isn't it? But he was saying that. He wrote an essay called A Penny Plain, Tuppence Coloured, referring to the idea of having ones that you get coloured in, or you bought ready coloured if you had the money and were too lazy to actually do them yourself. Well, not lazy, more other interests. This is an example of one of the productions. And I think by the time Robert Louis Stevenson, he was in the 1880s talking about it, it was very much a nostalgia thing then, because they were declining at that point. It had passed its heyday, in which it had closely followed the London stage. But they look fantastic, I think, the way you can see it there. And this is actually a shot of the Pollocks Toy Museum webpage. And it's got up and coming events in 2022, so it's actually still going strong. And from what I can make of it, it really would withstand. I think it'd be worthwhile going and making a visit there sometime. It really is quite an unusual place, as you will find out. Pollocks Toy Museum. I came across as well there's a short video that they did, a Zoom video of somebody doing his reminiscences of the shop in the 1950s and looking a bit at the history as well of the theatre, the toy theatres themselves. And this is a proscenium, stage front theatre to put the characters in mainly. Who do you think were most interested in these toy theatres? Any idea?
Royalty.
Well, I would think stage designers, people who are in the theatre.
No, teenage boys.
Ah,
Which surprised me. Though looking back at it, that was me and Brian Beardwood, really. We were a bit younger than that, but the same idea. And this was an interview with William West, who was one of the earlier ones of this, recorded by Henry Mayhew in the 1820s. After that, we were asked by the customers for theatres to put the characters in. So I got up the print of the stage front, thinking the customers would get the woodwork done themselves. But after the stage front, they wanted the theatres themselves of me more than ever. He seemed very reluctant to produce all these, by the way. So that I was obliged to keep 3 carpenters to make them for me. I turned out the first ever toy theatre for children as was ever got up for sale, and that was in the year 1813. And this is one of the designs for it. And this is Green, who was also one of the proscenium makers, and you can see a coloured version of it there.
Love the little orchestra at the bottom.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice that. It's a bit blurry because I've taken it from the screen of it. I'll just put you down here. This is an illustration from 1829, and which you can see the size of the stage is exaggerated for the drawing. And this Hodgson's shop was the boys in the illustration seem to be wearing their school uniform, he said, but I can't really see that. Is that with the ruffles, I suppose? And it was the most popular toy theatre play, which was the Miller and His Man. This is in fact a it's almost like a graphic novel. There's no real text except what's underneath the bottom. And what it's showing is on the left, a theatre being brought in, put on the table, and then they are being presented with the production, the producers on the right and the audience on the left. And this is the sort of thing that Pollocks Theatre did in terms of their catalogues. On the left-hand side are the earlier versions, the right are more complex on the right. And you can see just about on the right, there's a cockerel, there's dolls' heads, there's boats, and various other things. You could also buy at a certain time later, you could buy little lights to put on with them as well. So the little boats were little dolls' boats that you could have as part of your production. And this is one of the Pollocks. There are now 3 Pollocks toy shops of different, well, 2 toy shops and one that's a toy shop and a museum. Peter Baldwin apparently is an actor. Never actually heard of him. And this was in it was opened in 1980, and it's still going strong. I mean, they do look interesting places to go and visit, don't they? Especially if you have kids and things to look at them.
I think I'd been to that one in Covent Garden.
Have you? It's in Covent Garden.
Quite a while ago. I went when we went to the Apple Festival.
Oh, right.
Because when you mentioned it, I thought, I'm sure I've seen those in Covent Garden, but it's a while ago.
And these are the 3. There's the Pollocks Toy Museum, there's a toy shop, and there's a toy museum trust. I think there are two shops. There's a trust that keeps the toy museum going, and because there's like with a lot of these things, people come back to them either because they remember them as a child or because it's just the sort of Victoriana that is very interesting in itself. And here's one from, let me just move you over to that. This is George Spate performing at Bumbus's bookshop in Oxford Street from the Illustrated London News, 5th of January, 1935. It looks really good, doesn't it? There's something very, very 1935s about the people in the audience, but looking like they're having a good time. After one of these shows, a man came up to George Spate and he said, "Did you notice that guy in the corner?" He said, "No, who is he?" He said, it was Lawrence of Arabia. Well, you can't get more famous visitor than that. Not the person who played Lawrence of Arabia, the Lawrence of Arabia in the 1930s. George Speight was important in the modern development of the what were called originally the juvenile drama. He wanted to become a children's entertainer, but he was in the Navy in World War II, and so kind of lost a bit of time on that. But whilst he was out in Sri Lanka or somewhere, not a lot to do, he wrote the history of the English toy theatre from memory and did the illustrations himself. And this is Pollocks' original Victorian theatre, modern style. And you can see I think nowadays they're going in for like reinforced cardboard and the self-assembly. And I was thinking I might get one for the grandkids to see if they're interested in it, if they don't cost too much. They look quite interesting. But the quality of the drawings and whatever on them are still very good on the cardboard ones. It just makes it far more realistic to be able to assemble, though making something of cardboard that's in 3D, it's very, very difficult to make sure it's stable. I think they did that with quite good engineering. And here's one of the ones that went on sale, and these were coloured. I think the original, that one you just saw, was a prototype, and they really do look quite nice, don't they? These were I think they were called the Victorias, and then they also had one which was the Regency Theatre, and this shows, and these are from, I think it's from 1950s. And you can see that they were being made with injection molded plastic prosceniums and arches, and they came quite stable and quite fairly easy to build up. He aimed to sell 250,000 of these, so he produced some industrial quantities. This is taken from the theatre collection in Bristol. So they were going in the 1950s, and this is from a photograph. They're performing Aladdin, and you can see they've actually got the footlights using electricity. So they started to have lighting that you can have as an optional extra in it. But again, the typical interest in this was from teenage boys, like the two pictured here in a photo from 1950s, I think it was. And this is one of his paste up artworks for the coloured version of Cinderella, and you can see them there. These are ones done in 1947, but they look very much like the originals. And it requires quite a lot of work to cut them out delicately and to colour them in as well. Or as you can see with the bottom right one, they're already coloured in. I think I maybe have gone for that. It looks a lot of hard work colouring it in yourself. It depends on what your interest in is. Here's another one. This is a tuppenny coloured, and you can see it's not that they're upside down the other half. It's just means you can cut them down the middle and then start cutting them out from that. It's easier than just having them as one page. This was Cinderella. I think with this they were trying to appeal to more girls by having Cinderella. But again, rather beautiful, I think. He even did one based on Harlequinade. Do you know what Harlequinade is? It's not a drink.
It's commedia dell'arte, isn't it?
Yeah, but apparently it was the original designs for Harlequinade themselves were totally incomprehensible and bizarre. So he just made up his own version of it to do a Harlequinade, a procession of Harlequins. Again, rather beautiful. Here's one of Hamlet, and also designs for making your own theatre out of cereal boxes. Real blue
pizza.
Yes.
Though you wouldn't have the same access from the side, which is what you really need to be effective in doing theatre. So I don't think they were that popular. And this is one of the I think 19 was saying it. 1967. I can't remember. 1947. Anyway, right, yeah, to post-war. But you can see they're quite complex. And look at the lighting they've got at the back. But the problem was a lot of this was subject to what was a purchase tax, and it meant that they were priced out of how much people could afford. So in 1951, he became bankrupt. You think that was the end of that, except for this amazing half French actress called Marguerite Faudre. Actually, she wasn't born in 1912. It's 1912. That my mistake. And what happened was, her son. She worked with the BBC during the war. Second World War we're talking about. Her son John had a toy theatre, but she wanted to get some extra plays, and she contacted them and tracked Pollocks down and found, in fact, that they'd gone bankrupt. So she's obviously quite a formidable person. She went down and she bought the whole lot, everything that they had, including all the dies to make the various things from, and said, right, I'm going to set it up again. And there it is, with Margaret Faudre on the right at 44 Monmouth Street. And there's Pollocks Toy Theater and Museum. She managed to raise the money, set it up, and started it going both as a shop and as a museum. And well, I think all you can do is really congratulate you on her ability to do that and to make it a going proposition as well. And this guy on the right, doesn't he look French? It's Jacques. Where's the garlic over his shoulders? Anyway,
Where's the onions?
the onions over his shoulders.
And the beret.
Very much a Breton shirt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jacques Brunius, who's a French actor and also a collector of optical toys, and he got involved, and he was a surrealist. So his aim was his and her aim was to contextualize the whole idea of a toy theatre in the context of the theatre and of surrealism. And the museum itself became a bit surreal, and with a lot of old toys, which of course, especially things like old dolls, can be quite scary, can't they, looking? They're often used in horror movies, aren't they? And this is the Image d'Épinal, and it was produced in December 1951. So again, a bit blurred, but they're still going strong. The various shops and museums on it. And this is the Massacre of Penny Plain. Actually, it was a cowboy one. Can you see on the right?
Definitely.
Got cowboys. Yeah. And they had a story to go with it, and often they end up in explosions and things like that, because, well, young children like explosions, well, controlled ones presumably. But they found this, I thought was interesting. They found, and they also were aimed to do one on space travel, but I don't think they got around to finishing that. But the interesting thing was that the boys who were interested in wanted the Victorian things, not the modern things. So that's where they've gone back to doing, rather than trying to modernize it too much. What was interesting was the whole history of it. Its character was like that. We're back together again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's lovely. They're beautiful.
I only started looking at it yesterday, but it's like with these things, if you decide to look at something, it's like going down a rabbit hole. So you go from one thing to another and you can't stop yourself. So that's a bit like that. So I thought I'd share that with you. It's
they're works of art, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And again, if you're in London, Covent Garden, you can go and look at one of the shops there. It's a place people often visit in London, isn't it? And
Oh yeah, it's one of my favourite places.
yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, so
I'm just wondering how you would do the Royal Exchange in that format.
Good on you, Sandy. We are waiting.
okay. Get your cereal boxes out.
Yeah.
I think
And
you'll
your
need
sticky
about
back
6 of them.
plastic.
You could put a non-working lift in it. Yeah.
Oh, it's working again.
Yeah.
Just.
I've got a book which is a Victorian style book, and I liked it because of the fussiness and the colours and the laciness and stuff. And it has pop-up theatres, so as you open it, a theatre scene pops, a stage scene
Oh, they're
pops up.
lovely, those, aren't they?
They're
I
wonderful.
collected two of those. Stopped after 2.
And you've got to be really careful opening them, haven't you? That you don't-
Yes,
I
because
love pop-ups.
they're all cut very finely, and they're not reinforced. They're just slightly thicker paper or thin card, very thin card. But it's really exciting. I've had it since I was a teenager.
Well, thanks, Bernard. Brilliant.
Yes, thank you, Bernard. That was lovely.
Thanks, Bernard. It was excellent.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Really good. Yes, thanks a lot.